Greetings, everyone. Peter Mariavittoria here, welcoming you to another installment of City Lights Live, the official online calendar of City Lights booksellers and publishers in San Francisco. Tonight's event is being brought to you in conjunction with Synergetic Press. We are celebrating the launch and publication of the second edition of The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, My Life with Terence McKenna, which is published by Synergetic, and we are honored to have with us tonight its author, Dennis McKenna, joined by various friends. As is customary, before each event, I would like to let everyone know, as always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. I'd like to take this moment to offer our respect and acknowledgement to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Since its inception, City Lights has always expressed a strong interest in the study of consciousness and the exploration and promise of psychedelics. I mean, going back to our origins, we've placed an importance on the beneficial effects and applications of entheogens. From the books that we feature in the store to the books that we've published, we've made efforts to support this important research and those making strides in this area. The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss is a significant volume in the area of psychedelics, and its author, Dennis McKenna, has spent a lifetime researching the effects of psychoactive substances and their beneficial applications. Dr. McKenna is an ethnopharmacologist, research pharmacognosist, a lecturer, and the younger brother of the legendary psychedelic pioneer, Terence McKenna. Dr. McKenna's professional and personal interests are focused on the interdisciplinary study of ethnopharmacology and natural hallucinogens. He has taught courses in ethnopharmacology, botanical medicines and plants, and human affairs in the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota from 2001 to 2017. And he's a founding board member of the Hefner Research Institute and serves on the advisory board of nonprofit organizations in the fields of ethnobotany and botanical medicines. He was a key organizer and participant in the Ayahuasca Project, an international biomedical study of ayahuasca. And from 2004 to 2008, he was the principal investigator on a project funded by the Stanley Medical Research Institute to investigate Amazonian ethnomedicines for treatment of schizophrenia and cognitive deficits. Now, in Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, Dr. McKenna shares his reflections on psychedelics, philosophy, scientific innovation, and very importantly, his relationship to his brother, Terence McKenna, one of the single most influential figures in the modern psychedelic culture. So joining Dr. McKenna tonight in conversation will be an esteemed group of colleagues. We are honored to have with us Mariavittoria Mangini, Bruce Damer, and Luis Eduardo Luna. The evening will be moderated by Jasmine Virdi. Jasmine is a writer, educator, poet, and activist based in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. Her work focuses on psychedelics, spirituality, and ecology, and has been featured in Double Blind Magazine, Psychedelics Today, Psychedelic Press, and Lucid News, amongst others. Since 2018, she's collaborated with Synergetic Press on a variety of projects. Additionally, she volunteers for Fireside Project's Psychedelic Peer Support Line. Really delighted to have her doing the honors tonight. Also joining us is Mariavittoria Mangini. She has written extensively on the impact of psychedelic experiences and has worked closely with many of the most distinguished investigators in the field. She's the founder of the Women's Visionary Council, a nonprofit organization that supports investigations into non-ordinary forms of consciousness. Dr. Mangini has a long history with the Haight Ashbury Free Clinic, serving as a lead clinician in the medical section and chair of the board of directors. She's been a family nurse midwife for 35 years and was in primary care practice with Frank Lucido, one of the pioneers of the medical cannabis movement, for 25 years. She is Professor Emerita of Nursing at Holy Names University in Oakland, and her current project is the development of a Thanatology program for the study of death and dying. Also with us tonight, Luis Eduardo Luna is a scholar of comparative religion and served in the Department of Modern Language and Communications at the Henken School of Economics in Helsinki. He was an assistant professor in anthropology from 1994 through 1998 at the Department of Anthropology of Santa Catarina Federal University in Brazil. Dr. Luna is the author of Vegetalismo, Shamanism Amongst the Mestizo Population of the Peruvian Amazon, and co-author with Pablo Amaringo of Ayahuasca Visions, the religious iconography of a Peruvian shaman, as well as many other books. Dr. Luna has been curator of art exhibits in Europe, Latin America, and the United States. He is director of the Wasiwaska, I'm sorry if I pronounce this incorrectly, the Wasiwaska Research Center for the Study of Psychointegrator Plants, Visionary Art, and Consciousness in Brazil. So also joining us tonight is Bruce Damer. He's a Canadian-American multidisciplinary scientist, designer, and author. He began his career in the 1980s developing some of the earliest user interfaces for personal computers, brought the first multi-user virtual worlds into the internet, and since 2000, supported NASA and the space industry in numerous simulations and spacecraft designs. He has spent 25 years chronicling the history of computing in his Digibarn Computer Museum, and curates archives of countercultural figures such as Dr. Timothy Leary and also Terence McKenna, as well as many others. He continues to work on numerous projects and teaches at different universities around the globe. He is currently serving as principal scientist at DigitSpace. And so we're really delighted to have him with us. Please join us now in offering a warm welcome to all of our esteemed guests. To get the evening started, I'd like to turn things over now to Jasmine Virdi, who will do the honors. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, and thank you for that lovely introduction. And yeah, I just want to thank you all and the audience for being here with us this evening. Well, depending on where you're dialing in from, might not be evening for you, but yeah, I'm calling in from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, which is the ancestral territory of the Ñañu, Chichimeca, and Guamares peoples. And so, as you know, we're gathered here this evening to celebrate this beautiful book published by Synergetic Press, Dennis McKenna's new book, with our lovely panelists who Peter so kindly introduced. And yeah, as Peter mentioned, this book presents an autobiographical account of Dennis's life and, of course, his relationship with his brother, Terence McKenna. And through this intimate dialogue, I hope to unravel stories of the McKenna brothers' adventures into non-ordinary states of consciousness and beyond, reflecting upon how such explorations are interwoven with today's rapidly growing psychedelic movement in the global north. Yeah, and just a little side on Terence McKenna. So Terence began speaking publicly about psychedelics in the 1980s. And although he was popular at the time, his real rise to fame as a psychedelic bard came after his death in the early 2000s. Video and audio recordings of Terence's talks made their way into cyberspace and onto the internet, which no doubt Bruce will share more about later. And yeah, made Terence and also, Dennis by extension kind of, yeah, big figureheads for people of my generation in the psychedelic community. And yeah, just to kind of kick us off into the conversation, I'd love to ask Dennis a question around stories and storytelling. So stories play such a large role in shaping human culture and societies. And since this book is the second edition of a book that you self-published 10 years ago, a lot has happened since then. And for better and worse, and for worse, psychedelics have come to take up a new place in contemporary culture. And I'm curious to hear more about what you, Dennis, hope the retelling of these stories in this book will awaken in today's psychedelic movement.
Well, thank you, Jasmine, and thank you to everyone who's come, to my friends who have made time to participate in this conversation. I really appreciate it, and I know your time is valuable, so I'm very grateful for that. And next time you have an event to promote your work, anyone in here, then I'm on the hook for that, and happily so. So, on this call are some of my dearest and closest friends. So, I'm honored really to be here. Listening to these biographies, it seems, we have a very illustrious group here. I mean, it takes longer to read the biographies than it does to have the actual conversations, mostly because we have, long track records, sometimes checkered and sometimes not. But anyway, I decided that as most of you know that are familiar with the book, 10 years ago in 2012, the book was published just before what was supposed to be the end of the world, December 21st, 2012, which is what Terence had projected as the end of the time wave, which he was obsessed with most of his life, and which not coincidentally happened to be the end of a major cycle in the Mayan calendar. The prediction was that the singularity would come, and the space-time would collapse or at least transform, and then that would be the end of it, or there would be some kind of historical transition, and that never happened. People ask me, people sometimes ask me, what were you doing on December 21st, 2012? I was not out celebrating. I wasn't going to any of these apocalypse parties. You really want to know what I was doing on that evening? I was down in my basement furiously signing books, trying to get them ready for the next book event. And that was the first edition. And it was Dan Levy, Terence's former agent in New York, who I just saw, who urged me to try Kickstarter. I'd gone out to see him in 2011, and I had this idea to write a memoir, and he said, well, I was hoping he could find me an agent. Instead, he said, well, there's this new thing out there called Kickstarter. It was new at the time, and he said, you should try that. And so I did. I wrote up a little pitch on Kickstarter, and actually was able to raise enough money not only to publish the book, but to buy the time that it needed to write it. It took about 18 months to actually write the thing. And so Kickstarter turned out to be a good bet. And then that was published in 2012. And a lot's happened in the last 10 years, so I thought that it might be a good idea to publish a version of the book with a new chapter, and which is what this is. It's actually a new afterword that kind of reflects back on the last 10 years. So if people have the old edition, you have to buy the new edition, so you have both. And I'm sure everyone listening here will want to do that, so you can have those two on the shelf. But again, I want to extend my thanks to Synergetic Press. I don't know how I managed to do all this independently for the first edition. And when I thought about the need to do a second edition, I thought, I can't face this. I need help from professionals. And we had built up a good relationship with Synergetic Press because of the ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs proceedings, which we did in 2017, and they published that beautiful 2-volume set from that proceeding. So I figured if anybody is up to the task, Synergetic can do it, and they've stepped up. It's been a pleasure to work with them, and I think the result with the new cover and all that is it's very nice. I have nothing to complain about. In fact, I'm delighted to see it become reality.
I'm so glad you're pleased with the book, and it's been a joy to work with you. Likewise, Dennis, and get this beautiful story of you and Terence out into the world once again. And I guess I have a question for Maria, actually, and it is around this kind of shift that has happened around the way we conceive of psychedelics at large in the global north. And, Maria, well, today, psychedelic plant medicines and substances are becoming increasingly absorbed into and accepted within the mainstream through their medicalization. And over the last 20 years or so, we've seen an explosion of interest in psychedelic substances as tools for treating mental health disorders. But when Terence first started talking about psychedelics and in the 1980s, he waxed poetic, often describing psychedelics as exploratory, even alchemical tools that could provide us with ideas, insight into new dimensions, and access to different realities. In his book, Food of the Gods, he wrote, "You are an explorer and you represent our species, and the greatest good you can do is to bring back a new idea, because our world is endangered by the absence of good ideas." So I wonder what you, as someone who, is a psychedelic historian, if you will, makes of this shift in how we in the West kind of have conceptualized psychedelics, from these early ideas that Dennis and Terence shared. And, maybe also, Dennis, you can comment later around how your ideas are different and were different from Terence's. But I'm just curious about this kind of shift from psychedelics as an exploratory tool to a medicalized perspective, like taking a retrospective view on those ideas of Terence's, what was missing and what have we lost also in this medicalized framework, potentially?
Well, hopefully nothing is really lost, but there was a considered decision after many years of neglect and repression and reprehension to open the conversation with medicalization, because it had the best chance of not being immediately suppressed, I think. And it was very thoughtfully constructed in the early studies. They're really excellent research design and productive of some pretty startlingly wonderful results. And it's succeeded in reopening the conversation. But because of the sort of rapidity and enormousness of the increasing acceptance of psychedelics in Western society, we're at the risk of losing track of the fact that in the many ancient and historic uses of these substances, nobody had to have a diagnosis in order to partake of them. And I think that if we're living in a kind of desacralized, disenchanted society, and I think we have to remember that the potential for the uses of these medicines includes their sacred uses and their enchanted uses, and Terence was, and Dennis is, a notable exponent of that aspect of the use of psychedelics. And so I think that this is important for us to remember this right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Maria. And yeah, I also have a question for you, Luis Eduardo, because I know that you met Terence quite early on in your life at quite a young age. I think in 1971 in Colombia, your home country, when he was in search of yaje. And so I'd love it if you could share more about that first encounter, but then also a little bit about how you came to meet Dennis later, and also knowing both of them so intimately over the span of many years. I'm just curious to hear you reflect, upon the legacy of their brotherhood. That is, two brothers who are on parallel yet divergent paths, exploring consciousness, one through poetry and language and another through science. What does that story, that legacy of their brotherhood and their forays into consciousness and shamanism have to offer the contemporary psychedelic culture?
All right. Yes, it was 1971. Terence, I think he was 25. I was 24. And I had I was born in Florencia in the Colombian Amazon. I mean, it was the Amazon because there is no Amazon any longer there. The whole area has been completely destroyed, deforested by cattle and all that. But then in 1971 still, and I left Colombia when I was 18, and it was my return to Colombia. After 7 years, I was in Spain. And I went to see my parents, and it was in a bar. I saw Terence and Erika, and at the time, girlfriend at the time, trying to order something in a bar, you know. And I came and I said, "May I help you?" that sentence changed my life, you know, because, you know, Terence had just come from, well, he had been the same year as he was with Dennis in La Chorrera. I was the only one who spoke English there. And suddenly, you know, it came all these ideas and information. He was so enthusiastic. And I was, it was a very interesting for me time because, okay, for the first, I was in a seminar, you know, I was going to be a priest, but I have left the seminar already 5 years. And in those 5 years in Madrid, under Franco, you know, running with the police and the horses and all that. And I had become a militant atheist. You know, it's just the opposite of what I was there, you know. And then I met, but I was interested in philosophy, always been interested in philosophy. I mean, in fact, that was the reason why I got into the order, you know, the chance to learn. And so meeting Terence, it was fantastic because he was coming with all these ideas. He remember he was Mircea Eliade, Jung, Whitehead, and then one more item, very important one. He had this Colombian Santa Marta Gold. I had never smoked cannabis in my life. I mean, I have completely virgin. I mean, I never, I think that I got drunk in my life once, only when I was 13, you know, no experiences with these kind of things. And when I met Terence, he was looking for yahe. My father said, "Okay, you can go to a little place that we have called Villa Gloria," and we spent 2 months together there. He gave me the Santa Marta Gold, which was for me like coming back to my philosophical and religious interest. It was nothing about recreation. For me, it was a very serious matter. And in fact, Terence wrote several pages in his diary that Dennis kindly sent to me about what happened to me. For me, was a kind of a mystical experience or shamanic experience of some sort. And so we spent these 2 months together, and it was completely magical, you know, because during the day we were out in the pastures looking for mushrooms. We didn't find them, fortunately for me, because there will be too much, you know. And then we met this Hungarian guy we call Carlos, and then then we met a German guy who had a nice restaurant in Florencia, you know, and then we got some yahe, you know, from an Indian, Apolinar Yakanamihoy, who I knew since I was a child because he used to come to Florencia from time to time, and he came to my grandmother's little shop, and so. Carlos, this Hungarian, got this little yahe, and then we had the first experience together in Villa Gloria with Terence. Terence threw up a lot, me too, but I saw he was very angry in a way because I was having this vision like he was just throwing up and nothing happened. But for me, it was completely a revelation, that experience. And that changed my life, you know, because I said, wow, I didn't know that this was possible. I didn't have no idea that there are other rooms in my mind, you know, which I never visited. And so that was the beginning of my whole, it changed completely my life, completely, because then when I went back to Spain, then I went to Norway, and I started to study science for a while, some years. And I went to visit Terence in 1973 in Berkeley. We spent another 2.5 months together in Berkeley, reading all these fantastic books that came out, Peter Forst and Rachel Dolmatov and Michael Harner, and of course this came earlier, Carlos Castañeda and so on. So it was an absolutely extraordinary time that I spent with Terence. Those 71 and 73 in Berkeley. Then years later, I met Dennis, and I already was working on studying ayahuasca in Peru. And then I was invited to a conference in Vancouver. I wanted to meet Dennis, years, because Terence always told me my brother is a genius. So I had this idea of Dennis, this guy, extraordinary guy, and then we became very good friends. And we have been working together, gathering plants, sharing rooms from the fantastic hotels to really shitty places in Peru and pensions and so on. I don't know why we always end up together in the same room and talking. So it has been a friendship that has lasted the whole life. And then I met Terence gradually from time to time. I went to see him. In fact, it was Terence who pointed out the ayahuasca phenomenon in Iquitos. He had been in Iquitos. He got 3 names of practitioners. And the second name was Emilio Andrade Gomez. And then I went to Iquitos, met Don Emilio, did field work. I made a film about him, which you can find on YouTube. Don Emilio and his little doctors. You can find it in, with bad subtitles, but anyway, somebody put subtitles there. And it was for me the beginning, the discovery of the vegetalismo, the mestizo tradition in Peru, which had been neglected by anthropologists. Typically, when anthropologists go to Iquitos, they take boats and they go into the forest to the different indigenous tribes. I stayed there and discovered that right there was this extraordinary tradition which was very syncretic, because it had elements from Christianity, of course, also esoteric ideas, and then of course the Amazonian ideas from many different indigenous tribes and so on. So just a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luis and Eduardo. I loved hearing those stories, and especially I had no idea that you were, going to become a priest. And so it's beautiful to hear about this kind of like parallel path that you lived out, in going deeper into mysticism, but in different ways. So yeah, I loved hearing about that. And Bruce, I also have a question for you. And, I know that you met Terence towards the end of his life in the 1990s, and you were the person that introduced him to the medium of cyberspace and virtual worlds. And perhaps similarly to Maria, I know that you in your own way are also a chronicler of psychedelic history, and that after Terence's passing, you came into possession of his archives. That being audio and video cassettes of his talks that he gave over the years. But you decided to digitize the archive, which played an enormous role in bringing Terence, but also, Dennis by association, both of them to fame. And as Dennis writes in his book, since then, Terence, has achieved a kind of virtual immortality, his voice and image as near as the click of a mouse. Ghost-like, he haunts the internet, a talking head on YouTube, the articulate prophet of an end time he didn't live to see. And to a large extent, thanks to you, Bruce, Terence lives on as a, quote, beloved paterfamilias of a younger generation of psychedelic seekers, though most of them were still in diapers when Terence was at the peak of his career. And I include myself in that category, because I think I started down my path into psychedelics through discovering him on YouTube many, many years ago. And so, I'm curious to hear you speak about the process of introducing Terence to cyberspace before his death, but also kind of bringing him back and immemorializing him, in the form of, in your words, as a digital avatar after his passing. So I'd love to hear you speak about that.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine. This is a sort of a bookend in some ways to Terence's story that Luis Eduardo did such a beautiful job of giving us that front end. So, here we are in the 90s. Terence has been in the rave scene. In fact, yesterday was the 30th anniversary of the Revolution single release in the UK of Terence with the Shaman, which went to the top of the UK charts. It's 30 years ago. And it actually launched Terence as much as anything. And you'll read more about this in Graham St. John's upcoming book as a sort of biography about Terence as a media avatar. So rolling to the late 90s, I had started a whole movement and collected all the people and companies together to do something which basically Neil Stephenson had written about in the early 90s, to create a metaverse. And that's a sort of popular term right now, but instead of just web pages you clicked on to get other web pages, you'd actually see people and virtual landscapes. And these are visible landscapes or invisible landscapes made by code. And when Terence found out about them, he was, gobsmacked, another UK term, and wanted to know more. And so we got put together through cyberspace. Then he came here to Ancient Oaks in 1998, and I sat him down in front of a giant screen and put him into in-world. And he was this floating head doing his normal thing. And he was just enamored of it. So his son Finn bought a new PC because Terence was a Mac head and couldn't run any of these things. And we all agreed to meet in Hawaii at his house and do something we called the Alchemical Virtual Powwow. And you can see this on a YouTube video called Terence McKenna on the Natch. And it's Terence in this virtual world, and he chose an avatar that he named Zone Ghost. And later when I came into some of his papers, 15 years of his papers, there's a letter in 1995 where Terence writes, "Oh, one day if I could become an avatar, in a zone ghost of cyberspace," because it turns out that he was getting exhausted from all the travel. As he told me at the time, he said, "I get on a jumbo jet and I travel over the sea to speak to audiences of 30 people." So he wanted to do it differently. He wanted to somehow do that. So what we did was we made a tryptamine inflected world called Pollen. And this is late 90s technology. We powered up the generator at his house, got the satellite, got the connection to Kona, which gave him internet on the hillside on the volcano, and powered up this world. And for about 5 hours, we moved through, and Terence was a bug-eyed green lawnmower at one point. But we went through these worlds with audiences of 30 people, and he wrote a trip report about it. And later on at late night, I asked him to compare the tryptamine worlds of, say, the mushroom space and these avatar digital worlds, inflected tryptamine worlds. And his statement was, it was not unlike DMT, not unlike DMT. So roll the clock forward, 4 months after that, he had the seizure, a very large and very painful seizure. And his partner at the time, Christy, dragged him off the mountain in their pickup truck and got him to hospital. Actually, she flagged someone down on the highway who was an EMT. It actually saved Terence's life. It's an amazing story, this little piece. I think Dennis writes about this event. And then Terence is gone within the year. And we all met in Hawaii for the Alchemical Arts Conference in September '99, really to say goodbye. And I'll tell you one story that happened. So the last moments I was with Terence, I shared with him that when we laid down on the carpet, so Terence was was the last 30 minutes of the conference. There was Alex and Allison Gray and Robert Venosa and Martina Hoffman and all these people that were there. We decided to just sort of be in presence with Terence. Basically, the organizer said you could take a nap, you could send him healing energy, you could do whatever, but he's just going to sit in the room. And when my head hit the carpet, I flashed into a virtual world. And in that world, there was a lone Terence on a green plane and a whirring sound. And I looked up, my little sort of avatar camera looked up, and there was this glowing blob, and it was a approaching Fabergé egg vehicle with glistening sides, bejeweled Fabergé egg, of course, and it floated next to Terence, and Terence unfolded himself and stepped into it, and it was an unseen, I consider elven driver behind the windshield signaled, and they moved off, and Terence was lighting up. And so at the very end of the conference, was about an hour later, I said to Terence, I got to share with you what happened. And Terence heard the tale, turned to me and said, ah, the getaway car, the getaway car. So roll the clock 5 years later, Terence is gone, and we're searching for his digitized talks, and we found one FTP site. And we realized in our horror that, like the Grateful Dead, it was only on cassette tapes. We had to find these tapes. So I woke up one night saying, Terence, you left too soon. We're bringing you back. And we found them. We found tapes through Ralph Abraham, the trialogues. We digitized those on one crazy weekend using old-fashioned things called boom boxes while the MAPS conference was on. And we literally uploaded Terence, like that Fabergé egg. We uploaded his memory, in a sense, his shattered life by his early death, this sort of unbaked conclusion. We uploaded him there, and then it went from there. And the sources just came out. We probably had about 95% capture of Terence's legacy. And there's a picture that Lorenzo and Haggerty and I have where we have the box of dolphin tapes. You know, this is like the mother lode. And there they are, and they're in plastic cases from Ralph Abraham. And those tapes changed Ralph's life, not only Dennis's lives and all of ours and yours, Jasmine, but Ralph Abraham and Rupert Sheldrake both told me later it was that act that brought everything together for them in their lives. It brought younger listeners. You know, here's Ralph, you know, a mathematician and doing very abstract subjects, publishes a book every 18 months, and he has a huge following. Rupert Sheldrake, it all came from that one decision to basically capture that material and put it into cyberspace. So that's how it went down. And so I, in a sense, got the wonderful experience of being with Terence, but I only became, in a sense, a scholar about Terence after his death, when we were listening to all this material and collating it and putting it into podcasts. And I got to know Terence. And I got to know Dennis in 2011, around the time of the drafting of this book. And we hadn't met. And we formed a kind of partnership of our own around his brother's legacy in 2012. And I produced a number of events. One of them was at Sierra Madre, California, Burning Man and Esalen. And we did the Terence 2012 thing. And, you know, Dennis and I have gotten together ever since. We've drank, you know, nasty bitter tea high up in the Sacred Valley together. We've hiked to Machu Picchu. We've been at conferences, just the recent one in the UK last May. It's been a delight to get to know Dennis. I'm a scientist, so I really resonate with Dennis's approach to things, but I'm also a storyteller, and I love a good tale, as you could tell, and I just resonated with his brother, and I really regret not having, you know, a decade more with Terence. We were planning to go on the road. We're planning to talk about stuff. I would take the tech side, he would take the hermetics and the recipes and all of that. We were going to establish a partnership, but it wasn't to be. So in some ways, it's that direction is going on. It keeps motivating me to tell the story of and reflect on the story of these two remarkable brothers who have, have opened through their binoculars, have cracked open this screaming abyss for all of us to take a peek and try to get close to that cliff edge as we can.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. That story about the Fabergé egg getaway car, like, it gets me every time. And also, yeah, just kind of like the sense of wonder and inspiration that this story of this brotherhood has given me in my life. And I'd imagine many people here at this event. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing about that. Yeah, bringing it back to, your brotherhood with Terence, Dennis, I'm curious, I know obviously the term brotherhood and the title of this book refers to your relationship with Terence, but I remember that it also refers to like a group that you had formed with Terence and other friends. So I'd love to hear you speak about what the brotherhood was, but also what the screaming abyss was also. And yeah, I mean, for me, when I think of the term abyss, it awakens like a sense of like dual fear and wonder, and the screaming abyss at that. So I'd love it if you could, speak to the abyss that you encountered with this so-called brotherhood.
Well, yes, I can. So all of that is kind of wound up together, the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. It was really a sort of a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. We were I guess you could say that in some ways the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss is everybody in this generational era that's been involved with psychedelics. We're part of the Brotherhood, but on a more personal level, the Brotherhood was basically my brother, myself, and the people that came to La Chorrera with us. So there were about 5 of us. Terence, myself, his girlfriend, who he picked up along the way, and then 2 of his close friends from the experimental college in Berkeley, Sarah Hartley and Michael Lasky, who are discussed under pseudonyms in Terence's book, True Hallucinations. But these were the people. That was the core of the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, was the people who were effectively so obsessed with the psychedelic experience, and particularly DMT, that they were ready to, quit their jobs, drop out of school, and go off with us to South America in quest of this really obscure hallucinogen, ukuhe, which we were convinced was the secret. We referred to it as the secret that we were going after, and the Screaming Abyss, had to do with a sort of a tongue-in-cheek view of what this was. So as it turned out, we went to La Chorrera because the reason we went to La Chorrera was simply because we had read a paper by Schultes, Richard Schultes, that talked about this preparation, ukuhe, and it was something that the Witoto people had, and La Chorrera happened to be the ancestral home of the Witoto. So when we read this paper, the thing is that this grew out of kind of our dissatisfaction with DMT, that we'd experienced synthetic DMT and it was satisfying in every way, except it was too short, and it only lasts about 10 or 20 minutes. And you couldn't, by the time you could begin to, grok it and see what was going on, you were already coming down. So our motivation to go to La Chorrera was, we thought if we could find an orally active form of DMT, it would last longer, and we could spend more time in that dimension. And we definitely thought of it as a dimension, as a place, and see what was going on. So when this paper popped up on our radar at the time, this paper by Schultes called Virola as an orally active hallucinogen, I mean, it may as well have been in neon letters. This paper came up and we thought, this is it. This is the secret. This is what we're going to go after, and I should mention that at the time, in 1970, 1968, 69, 70, the pharmacology of ayahuasca was not well understood. It was not understood that it too is an orally active form of DMT. The importance of the admixture plants only emerged around that time, and it wasn't quite clear the importance of these admixture plants. So we thought this preparation made from Virola, which definitely was based on DMT, was what we had, in terms of finding an orally active form of DMT. And this was the siren song that led us to go to South America. Now, when it turned out, when we actually got to La Chorrera, and the quest for this rare, secret, and obscure psychedelic is what brought us to La Chorrera in search of that thing. But when we got there, what we found was, number one, we'd encountered an anthropologist on the way into La Chorrera at the next village downriver. And we knew he was there. We'd heard reports in Bogota that we'd probably run into this guy. And it's 1971, you couldn't just send a text and say, I'm going to show up in the next couple of days. So we just showed up there, and he was appalled, because of, we were totally unexpected, and we looked very strange. We were, we looked like we'd stepped right out of Haight Ashbury, which we had. Basically, we all had long beards, and we had the garb of the day, and he was not happy, really, to see these unexpected visitors. And he was even more unhappy when we started asking about ukuhe, this obscure psychedelic that the Watoto had. He just about lost it, and he said, you can't just go in there and start asking for this thing. This is like their biggest shamanic secret. They will probably just kill you if you even so much as mention this. Well, he was a little excitable, and it later came to light that he chewed coca constantly. I mean constantly, and he was a little paranoid. I think he had a touch of, paranoid psychosis, but that's another story. But we said, sure, we'll be careful. We won't just go in and ask about this immediately. And we went on to La Chorrera from this village. And when we got to La Chorrera, we found that it was a mission village. There had been pastures cleared around this village, around 200 acres or so pastures, in which they put these cebu cattle, these white humped cattle. Of course, the dung of these cattle is the preferred substrate for Psilocybe cubensis. And it happened to be the rainy season, and there were huge, big, beautiful clusters of Psilocybe cubensis sprouting out of every cow pie, and we thought, wow, this is great. This is fantastic. We knew what they were. We had absolutely no experience with them. Just one very light experience on the way in. We had no real experience with them, but we kind of thought, well, these will essentially we can play with these. We had a very cavalier attitude that we could recreationally use these mushrooms while we waited for the real secret, this ukuhe, to show up. Well, the mushrooms had a different agenda. They very quickly made it clear that they were the real secret, and as we started eating them pretty much on a daily basis, the message from the mushrooms is pay attention, you guys, because I have a lot to download to you. And they did, and our focus on ukuhe kind of faded into the background. Eventually we did find it, but it took 10 years. I never actually found the samples until I went back to Peru in 1981 to do my graduate work. That particular preparation turned out to be fairly disappointing when we finally did find it. The mushrooms were anything but disappointing. And, because they more or less took over, they sucked us into this very strange kind of ideational dimension where they were, transmitting all of this gnosis, or what we interpreted as gnosis, about how we could do very strange biophysical things to our bodies and effectively create a transformational machine that was both a machine, that was made out of our bodies, but that was actually kind of a superconducting information transducer, if you want to put it that way. So that took over, and that became what the experiment at La Chorrera is all about, and which we don't really need to go into because people could read the book. And in the book, I do say, Terence wrote about this in True Hallucinations, and I wrote about it extensively in this book, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. And there are about 3 chapters in there that dissect this whole myth and experience of the experiment at La Chorrera, which was not an experiment, actually. In no way does it correspond to an actual experiment. It really should probably be called the ritual at La Chorrera in some ways, but experiment sounds better. It sounds cooler. And we did attempt to carry out an experiment. We had no idea what we were doing, but it had a kind of a spectacular result. And and then that event became the sort of the core event that defined both of our lives. I think Terence and me, both, when we look back, it's like there was pre-La Chorrera and post-La Chorrera, and most of our I was 20 at the time. Terence was only 24. Most of our lives were lived in the post-La Chorrera era. And so that's how it played out.
Yeah, thanks for that story. I love how, the ritual at La Chorrera, and definitely for those that are interested, read about it in the book, because Dennis does give a very detailed account with some also retrospection intertwined. And so I do recommend reading about it. And before we round off.
Can you imagine, Dennis? Can you imagine? I was the receptor of all those ideas. I was 24, and suddenly Terence got me stoned, and all these ideas on top of me. That I have not recovered yet from all that.
In a sense, none of us have. I still think we're seeing the resonance of this event rippling through space-time. It still has an effect. But I think the interesting thing is, well, there are many interesting things about it, but we tried to effect a experiment which was by definition impossible. If the experiment would have succeeded, it would have meant basically we'd have to overturn the laws of physics and collapse space-time and all of these effects that we predicted, none of which happened, so in some ways the experiment was a colossal failure. But what was successful was something that was not supernatural at all. The fact that we collected the mushrooms, we collected the spores, we brought the spores back, we mucked around for a couple of years to figure out how to grow them, and then we figured out how to grow them. And that's very simple, and no physical laws were violated, in getting to that. But having a simple way to grow the mushrooms that any intelligent 11th grader could figure it out with a little patience, that, and just as long as they had the spores, you could buy the material to grow it at any grocery store, and you could set up a little mushroom farm in your basement or wherever was convenient, and a lot of people did. And I think that is really what was transformative, about what we did. We didn't set out to change the world. We set out to do more spectacular things and like end history, that didn't happen, but we did. We had an
Dennis,
impact on society in some ways.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, the mushroom came from the zebu, the cattle,
Right.
and the cattle that was destroying the Amazon, including my own hometown. I mean, Caquetá has been all destroyed by cattle, but on that cattle grows this mushroom, which it's very interesting. How things happen. In a way, this mushroom came out of the destruction. What was happening there in the Amazon, and like a sort of, you pick it up, it's a sort of warming, and it's changing. It has changed. Many people. I don't say the world, but many people.
But it's changed many people, and I think, it's interesting that you make that point, that here is a human introduced factor, the cattle, that have been very destructive to the Amazon. It's not the mushroom's fault, but the mushroom happens to grow on the dung of those cattle. So you get this human symbiosis, human cattle mushroom symbiosis, and the mushrooms happen to be a catalyst that is waking up our species, along with many of the other psychedelics, to the damage that we're doing to the planet. Whether we're waking up soon enough or fast enough, whether we'll do anything about it, all of that is open to question. But mushrooms were definitely, they opened the window to a lot of these concerns. And it's just interesting the way that, Terence one time said, and I think he said many interesting things, but I think, he said once, we're involved in a symbiotic relationship with something that has disguised itself as an alien invasion so as not to alarm us, and I think that's true, and it's happening. So if you look at it from the sort of biological evolutionary perspective, this is what we're seeing as the mushroom becomes more and more sort of integrated into the life of the 20th century civilization, globalization. Mushrooms are everywhere, and other psychedelics as well. But mushrooms, they're different because there are no issues about supply, like with ayahuasca. There's tremendous concerns about depleting this resource through over-harvesting and overuse. The ayahuasca tourism is certainly a double-edged sword. I participated in ayahuasca tourism. I've arranged ayahuasca tourism, that sort of thing, but I'm beginning to think that maybe that's not a good idea. But what's different about the mushrooms is basically anyone can grow them, with a little effort, and that's a true symbiotic relationship that you're setting up. You know, all the
Mhm.
mushroom wants to do is grow. This is what fungi do. If we facilitate that, the mushroom rewards us, you know, with this beautiful molecule that opens the vision screens to many worlds, as Terence was fond of saying. So it's a true symbiotic, mutually beneficial kind of thing, and it is a catalyst that is waking up our species, you know,
Well,
hopefully before it's too late. I mean, that's the problem.
I think you and Terence definitely turned a lot of people onto mushrooms with your, mushroom growers guide published under that pseudonym many years ago, which hopefully Peter can put in the chat. I'm just kind of conscious of time as well, I have one more quick question for Maria, and then maybe we can switch over to like 10, 15 minutes of Q&A, which I'll pass on to Peter. But yeah, with this whole context about bringing back the spores and publishing this mushroom growers guide and just this history more generally, I'm curious. Well, in a way, this book is a snapshot of psychedelic history and culture in the West throughout the 60s and onwards, and perhaps a particular part of it, but I think it touches on many others. And I'd just love to hear your reflections on how the spirit of the McKenna brothers' adventures have come to shape the psychedelic movement as it is today.
Well, I think that it's really important for the psychedelic movement of today to have a counterbalancing influence to commercialization, monetization, and to a certain extent medicalization. And none of these substances are toys, but the uses that are most of interest to me are I hesitate to use the word recreational because it is associated with a kind of frivolity that I don't really mean to imply, but transformational or transformative or developmental for the production of different kinds of insight, and that the realization that it isn't necessary to be ill in order to undertake to have these experiences. And I think that we could easily make the error of thinking that you have to be either sick or sicker to do this. But the joy and excitement and exploration that's expressed in this work and these lives is a real balancing influence for the sort of somewhat leaden and somber ways in which psychedelics are increasingly being reintroduced into Western society. It's also, the fact that these adventures took place and that these folks are still here to tell us about them is encouraging too, because there's a evidence that perseverance furthers, that courage counts, that adventure is important, and just being able to know that there are people like that, I think, is very important.
Yeah, Maria, I really appreciate your making this point. I mean, that I think the word recreational use, it has been vilified in a certain way. Parse the word recreation. What is it?
Yep.
Recreation.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with that. You can use the mushroom for recreation. That is pretty much, and it doesn't have to be all serious. There should be a little levity in this. Bring back an element of joy and humor, and that's one thing that's beautiful about the mushrooms. They make you laugh, and I think laughing is important. I mean, if
also
life,
ayahuasca, yes.
Bob Jesse likes to use
maybe it makes you laugh.
Make you laugh.
Bob Jesse likes to use the word ludic. So
that's nice.
Something that encourages you to play.
But you don't have to be sick to benefit from psychedelics. We can all benefit, because these are teachers, really. They're teaching tools, and you can be I mean, if you do have issues like mental health issues, they can be very helpful, but they're also helpful just to help us be better humans. You know, I've always liked what Rick Doblin said. I think he said it several times, but he said, people don't take psychedelics to have psychedelic experiences. They take them to have human experiences. That's a profound statement if you think about it.
Yeah, thanks for that, both Maria and Dennis. And I think Peter was going to take it over from here for the Q&A. I don't know where Peter is. Maybe he can jump back in. And yeah, wonderful. And I see that Robin has their hand up.
Yeah, we've got actually quite a few questions. I'm not sure if we're going to get around to everything. I will try to pull a few out of the chat to the best of my ability. Let's begin with Ron. This is a question for Dr. McKenna. From the account in True Hallucinations, what was the deep state that you were in? Perhaps a fugue or a dissociative state, or being in the medicine for days that Terence wrote about? What was it like to come back, quote unquote?
Well, I was in a deep state. I mean, I was in a state where, you know, the perception was that, you know, from me subjectively, that I had been so blown apart, literally. The structure of my consciousness, my ego, was co-contiguous with the boundaries of the known universe, right? So we've heard all this, you know, we're all one, as above, so below, we are not separate from the cosmos. I had that experience, and the progress of the recovery was that that it was a process of recondensing at each 24 hours of this process, which took about 2 weeks, was a further condensation from this completely dissociated state where I was, you know, melded with the cosmos, to the next time, the next 24 hours, it was like the supercluster, and the next one, it was the galaxy, the next one, the solar system, and so on and so on. And it became ever more concentrated and personal, till finally I got back more or less into my body and mind, although it took a while. But that's how I came out of it. You know, it was like returning from a long trip to another place. And you know, it's interesting that the metaphors that we applied to what was happening to us were not really spiritual or shamanic or anything. You know, I mean, we were both immersed in science fiction, and science fiction was the modality in which we were understanding these things. I mean, we believe that we were actually exploring other dimensions, and who's to say that we weren't, you know? But you know, normally we think of this as, you know, some element of consciousness, but then where does personal consciousness end and the cosmos, you know, take over? They're not really separate. And psychedelics, this is one thing you learn from them, you know. It really is true that you know, all is one and we are all one. And that, you know, sounds like a trivial insight, but it's different when you actually experience it, you know, then it makes sense.
I have a question from Solomon. Terence once talked about how the shaman has become the artist, but as our culture lost its reverence for the sacred, so too did art. As psychedelic healing occurs across contemporary culture, how do you all see the role or place of the visionary artist changing along with that, especially considering that there is an immediate need for those who are capable to reimagine or re-envision global culture?
I think Eduardo is a good candidate to answer that question. Don't want to put him on the spot, or Bruce or someone.
I will need, if I have to answer, I have to you have to read the question again.
Yeah, no,
I-
I'm happy to. Yeah.
All right.
Let me scroll up again because the questions are coming very quickly now. Terence once talked about how the shaman had to become the artist, but as our culture lost its reverence for the sacred, so too did art. As psychedelic healing occurs across contemporary culture, how do you all see the role or place of the visionary artist changing along with that?
Well, I think that this is happening, in a way, I mean, in art, I have my experience with Pablo Maringo, who was able to bring that some of that imagery to put into canvas, and that had an incredible impact. I mean, there was Dennis has said that there was the beginning of the globalization of ayahuasca, of which I have many doubts as well. I don't know whether it was a mistake or not. I'm still thinking about that. But anyway, yes, the artists the artists are changing with experiences. Of course, that's impossible not to. Yes. I mean, and there is a huge current now of visionary art, which has so many different genera in a way, because there is also the electronic, the high tech, of which I know very little, but I mean, their art is doing incredible things, 3D things and all that. So I think that the artist has been absolutely fundamental, and perhaps one of those that bring in the torch from the outside through the art. There are others through philosophy, others through different practices or ideas, because that's what happens, it gives you ideas. That's what Terence used to say, psychedelics gives you ideas,
Gives you funny ideas.
Or creation, yeah. Right.
That's right. And these things, I mean, these things, the artist, the shaman, the performer, the roots of these things is found in shamanism. I mean, shamanism was the most ancient, and they were more than just medical. They were more than just healers. They were articulators of the voice of the cosmology of the culture. Like, I'm always reminded of Henry Munn's beautiful passage in, I think it was Hallucinogens and Shamanism, called The Mushrooms of Language, where he points out that Maria Sabina in the mushroom velada, it just pours out of you, this cosmogonic worldview. That's what was happening to us at La Chirera. It opened the floodgates of ideas. They were coming so fast, and we were trying to put them into some kind of framework that made sense. I mean, I was doing literally automatic writing, trying to get these ideas down, and couldn't get it fast enough. So I think that the mushrooms, psychedelics in general, but mushrooms especially, open the doors to these ideational spaces where, what comes out is poetry, and what comes out is it can be expressed visually as well. It's very interesting that I think at the end of Terence's life, when he was working with Bruce to try to develop and explore these virtual worlds, and the tools that were available at the time for VR were very crude. And of course, they've been tremendously advanced since then. I think if Terence had lived to see some of the advances in VR technology, maybe he would have said, no, who needs psychedelics? We can do this all through cyberspace, or maybe not, I don't know.
Dennis, one thing that worried me, in which I think that it was in a way embedded also in Terence's ideas, and this of other worlds, and you know, shamanism is very much about this world, is about the natural world. It's connection with everything that happened, that, you know, is there, you know. And I think in a way, psychedelics should, you know, in a way should bring us to, again, to animism, which is, you know, everything, intelligence is everywhere. And that is the main thing with the shamans, you know, it's, you relate with persons, you know, non-human persons, but persons, everything. And I think that is the revolution that we need at this point, you know, instead of other worlds. Okay, you know, yes, you can get lost in many other worlds, but what about this world? And then, and we are in a very difficult moment right now. So we need to get to this world.
Yes, and I think it's interesting that animism, which is at the root of the indigenous worldview, the shamanic worldview, is actually the closest reflection to the current scientific understanding. I mean, the more we understand, the more we see that science is compatible with this. The idea that intelligence in consciousness is something that is built into nature at the very most fundamental levels, you know, and in part, that's what psychedelics help us do. They help us, they're a lens essentially through which we can view the world and see these processes going on and realize that, yes, this is a reflection of consciousness that is going on here that's normally opaque to us because we're programmed to filter it out. But the psychedelics demolish those filters temporarily. They open us up to these perceptions, and then you see through the lens, you know, that's been cleansed of all the filtering mechanisms, and you see how it really works. These processes in nature really work. And you can be nothing but, to borrow Bruce's phrase, you could be nothing but gobsmacked. You know, I mean, it's just marvelous. And they're tools for understanding nature, you know, really, in looking at nature in ways that we just can't without that assist, or maybe it's a learned skills, but the psychedelics help, certainly.
Okay, let's see. I have a question from Dennis Hargis. Do you think there is a place for non-therapeutic models of reorientation to augment contemporary models of integration in order to acknowledge, encompass, and honor more transformative modes of consciousness and ways of being catalyzed through psychedelics?
Well, who is that directed to?
That is, I think that's directed at you.
I was afraid of that. Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understand that. I think that, like we said before, the psychedelics, you know, they have therapeutic applications. If they were limited to that, that would be remarkable and that would be wonderful, but there's so much more than that, you know. I mean, that is the thing. In some ways, we're all wounded, you know. You cannot live in this culture without being traumatized, you know. And so in a certain sense, we all need the kind of healing that that psychedelics can bring about. And, you know, it has nothing to do with the kind of clinical diagnosis that we must have. I think we all feel, you know, in this culture, we feel a fragmentation and we feel a alienation, if you will, from nature. And that's the root of the problem, and psychedelics can heal that. So if that's a non-therapeutic use, you know, I'm all in favor of it, you know. Yeah.
Kim asks, and this is in reference to Invisible Landscape, the idea that there is a connection between DNA and the visionary state. And Kim wants to know what you feel that connection may be. the influence between genetic material on the mind and vice versa?
Well, yeah, I mean, the interesting, there are many interesting things about the invisible landscape. I think that most of the ideas were not valid. I mean, in the end of the day, they were not valid. They were not based. And one of the problems was that they couldn't really be tested. This was not a theory. A theory has to define within itself what will invalidate it. So that never happened with time wave zero. Terence constructed it, but he couldn't define how to prove it or disprove it. And in science, you never prove anything. You can only not disprove something. But that step was never taken. And the time wave failed its ultimate test, which was December 21st, 2012. That was the date that Terence settled on, was going to settle the matter, and it was going to settle the matter by the continuum collapsing, and we wouldn't be having this discussion anymore. And that didn't happen, so that it failed its major test. And but there are interesting mathematical things about the time wave, and certainly the relationship to the structure of DNA, which it may have elucidated because of the 64 and the 64 base pairs and all that. Whether there's a coherent theory there of how DNA relates to the time wave, I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think you can really make an argument that many of the insights or suppositions that came out of the invisible landscape, at the end of the day, they don't hold up. So it was an interesting and very peculiar book in some ways, but I'm not sure that apart from historical interest, it carries much validity. I mean, honestly, what it did do is stimulate people to think very much out of the box, maybe a little too far out of the box. I don't know.
Dennis, one of the things that is important for me, the invisible landscape, is that, perhaps you cannot validate this or that, but it points into so many different directions at the same time. So somebody who is interested in this, it will go into science, it will go into philosophy, it will go into art. It's much wider. So it is a very good introduction to something much bigger, and I think that is the value. Regardless of whether I mean, you can prove or disprove.
Right.
Certainly.
Right. No, that is its value. I mean, it's not that it ties all this stuff together into any coherent thread. I mean, the thread, it brings the threads together, but not in any coherent way, but it certainly brings them all together. And, I think that the invisible landscape, well, I wrote half of it, but I wrote about theories of drug action and so on. That we now know from what we know in molecular biology and so on, were not valid. The time wave is much harder to dissect. I think the time wave it's undoubtedly an interesting mathematical artifact. I think it tells you much more. It tells us much more about Terence's personality than it does about time. It tells us about Terence's lens, how Terence viewed time and history. He put that all into the time wave. and it's a reflection of how he understood history and time. In that respect, it's a very interesting document, because he was extremely well read. He knew a lot of history. He knew philosophy. He knew alchemy. He knew the esoteric arts. He knew all of these things. He studied these things obsessively and tried to bring all this together into the philosophy of novelty, basically. The time wave was supposed to be an instrument for predicting novelty, ingressing into the continuum. Did it do that? I don't know. I mean, we used to have arguments, or shall we say spirited discussions. Terence and I used to have spirited discussions about what is novelty? What is it really? And he was sort of an advocate of the punctate theory of novelty, that, novel events erupt into the continuum, like the first detonation of the atomic bomb, was one of the examples he cited as a truly novel event. And I was an advocate of the more gradualist view of novelty. What about all the novel discoveries that had to take place before the atomic bomb could be detonated? All those things that took place quietly in laboratories, or in the mind of Einstein, for example, when he was developing relativity. These were not spectacular events, but they all had to happen in order for that spectacular event to take place. So I think novelty does ingress into the continuum, but most truly novel events are not not known to be such until much later. I mean, one example I talk about in the new portion of the book, we talked about, it starts out talking about Y2K, and Y2K was this expectation that because the computer calendrical systems were screwed up at the end of 1999, all the computer systems on the planet were going to collapse, and it was going to be quite spectacular. Well, one of that didn't happen, but one thing that did happen at the end of, on the very last day of 1999, was that Vladimir Putin assumed the office of president of the Russian Federation. Nobody noticed or cared about it at that time, but look at the consequences that that's had now. So that was a novel event, that has had tremendous consequences. But at the time, nobody paid any attention to it. I don't know why I got off on that tangent, but anyway.
Well, we have gone over our allotted time. There are so many trajectories that we can take. Everyone's been fantastic in the chat. There is so much coming our way, and we just do not have the time to tackle it all. A lot of different rabbit holes for us to possibly go down, but we have gone past our time. So I do want to thank everyone for engaging with us. Again, apologies that we can't cover all and everything, but we've covered an awful lot. And please do check out the book. Really want to thank you all for this presentation. Congratulations, Professor McKenna, for this new edition. Thank you, Jasmine, for doing the honors, and to all of our esteemed speakers for gracing our virtual halls. Also, thanks to everyone in the audience from around the country and around the world for joining us tonight. Also want to really thank our friends at Synergetic Press. Wonderful shout out to Sandy Balin, also the publisher of Synergetic Press, Deborah Parrish-Snyder, for all that they both do. Synergetic has been publishing some amazing work over the years, and we've had the great pleasure of working with them on numerous events. So we posted links with which you may also explore their catalog. Also want to remind everyone, City Lights carries a full selection of books on psychedelics. It's something we've been interested in since our inception. Encourage everyone, come on down to the neighborhood, browse our stacks. We're located in San Francisco's historic North Beach district. We're open 7 days a week. Our new hours are now Monday through Thursday, 11 to 8, and also Friday through Sunday, 11 to 9. I also want to point out City Lights is celebrating its 70th anniversary in 2023. We're going to be featuring a special calendar of events beginning in May and running through to the end of the year. These are going to include live in-store events, online events, also poetry readings in Kerouac Alley, historic tours, and much, much more. So please do keep an eye on our calendar for that. Tonight's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, our publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So good night, everyone. Please take care. We hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you so much, Peter. Very honored to have City Lights Books, which is venerable and historic, be one of the first platforms for the release of the second edition. Thanks for all you do, and just keep it up. Keep up the good work.
Bye.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Maria. Luis Eduardo.
Thanks to all my friends, those on the speakers and those checking in. Thanks for everything.